Thank you for your introduction. I'm Kondo with Yokohama National University. I will speak in Japanese with your permission. Now, let me give you an outline of my presentation today. First of all, I would like to talk about the basic facts about elderly employment in Japan, taking a reference of statistical data. Some of statistical data points are similar to what had been shown by Professor Jimino, but nevertheless, also I will just talk about legislative reforms, key reforms which took place in the 2000s. To be more specific, I would like to talk about the gradual changes to the pension system in Japan since 2001. And also I would like to talk about the amendments to the EESL in 2006. These are the two legislative reforms that I would like to give a look at. And I would also like to discuss who were affected by these reforms, which will be followed by a review of existing empirical research. What are the findings so far? That's the fourth point. To be more specific, I would like to discuss how pension reforms affect elderly labor supply. I will give you an overview of the past research on the pension system reform that took place in the past. And secondly, I would like to discuss to what extent the ESL revision on employment had an effect, and this will be the outcome of my own research, and I would like to briefly discuss that, the findings. And thirdly, under bullet point 4, I would like to discuss substitution effect for younger workers. So this is an area where we haven't seen much progress in terms of research. Policies to promote employment of the elderly could have had some implications on the employment of the young, and we have yet to be conclusive. But I would like to share with you what findings we have available to date. Last but not the least, I would like to discuss how measures to promote elderly employment have affected young. What are the things we need to elucidate? I would like to discuss what are the things that we need to elucidate in order for us to identify better policies, although there are many things that have yet to be elucidated. Before I discuss elderly employment, I would like to touch upon the reality of the aging in Japan. This should be the starting point of our discussion. This shows the population pyramid of Japan. Population pyramid has population on the horizontal axis, and vertical axis shows the age and what is the population for each age. On the left is male and on the right is female. But it's called a population pyramid because every society used to have a larger young population with fewer elderly at the top. But in the case of Japan, it's no longer a pyramid. Or it's called a population pyramid. As you can see from this pyramid, one important takeaway is that population over 65 shows is frequently used as an indicator of the degree of aging in a given society, and this pyramid is based on the census, national census, which was conducted in 2010. At the time of 2010 national census, already the population of 65 accounted for 23.1% of the total population in Japan. Since then, the baby boomers, so-called baby boomers, have reached 65. Therefore, currently the population over 65 is in excess of 25%. So at the moment, 1 out of 4 is 65 or more, 65 or older in the Japanese society. And what is important in order for us to understand in trying to put into context the trend since 2000 is the baby boomers. Generally speaking, baby boomers are defined as those who were born between 1947 and 1949. Of course, there are slightly higher population before and after 47 and 49 respectively. But in comparison to those who were born in the 1950s, or those in comparison to those who were born before the war or during the war, the baby boomer population is much larger than the generation that came before or after them. And baby boomer junior is another generation where there are a lot of population. After the baby boomer junior generation, the younger the generation, the smaller the number it gets. So already many years have passed, 40 or so years have passed in Japan since the population of the aged overtook the population of the elderly, and working age population continues to shrink as we speak. That is the reality that we face in Japan. Now, let me talk about. Let us have a look at the labor force participation rate and employment to population rate for those in late 50s to the 60s. Employment to population is the percentage of workforce in the total population. Workforce is the sum of those employed and those looking for jobs, i.e., those who are unemployed. And employment to population rate is the employed in the population, and this shows the dotted line shows labor participation rate, and the solid line shows employment to population. And blue is in the latter half of 50s, and the red shows early part of 60s, and green shows latter half of the 60s, those in the latter half of the 60s. There are generational gaps. The older you get, the lower these rates become. For those who are in the 50s, 90 or so % of them are working. If you were to include unemployed, more than 90% are employment to population rate, but employment to population rate for those early 60s is in excess of 70% at the moment. When it comes to the other half of 60s, somewhere between 40 and 50%. One of the salient characteristics of recent years is that, as I've touched upon briefly, employment to population rate for those in early 60s is rising. 15 years ago, it used to be 65% or so. In 2014, it was close to 75%. So the employment to population rate for those in early 60s is rising. And this, I believe, is the effect of policy changes that I will talk about in detail later on. Participation rate is also rising, but a rise in employment to population rate is more than rise in participation rate. This shows the same plot for female. 50s, first half of the 60s and the other half of the 60s. In comparison to male, both rates are lower than men across all age categories. Most of the females are vast majority are either part-timers or employees of business owned by their family members. But employment rate is rising for all age categories, including the latter half of those in the latter half of the 60s. And the difference between participation rate and employment to population rate is smaller, which suggests fewer female unemployed. This shows This is an overlap with what was shown by Professor Himeno, Dr. Himeno, but this shows international comparison of employment rates for those 60 or above. As you can see, employment rate of Japanese men in their early 60s is very high. Employment rate of Japanese in their 60s is higher. Employment rate of Japanese men in their early 60s is very high. This is related to EESL. Not as much as those in the first half of the 60s, but the male employment rate of 65 and over, 1 out of 4 at 65 or over is working. For female, perhaps less than male, but relatively speaking, employment rate is quite high. For younger generation, female employment rate in Japan is relatively low, but for older generation, there isn't much difference with the United States, and it's higher than countries in Europe except for Sweden. Why is that employment rates are high? I believe there are two reasons. First is that national pension for self-employed, pension for self-employed is not that sufficient. Anecdotally, we oftentimes hear that national pension is not enough to support their livelihood. In this chart, Korea is yet another country where they have a high employment rate. In comparison to the West, South Korea is yet another country where pension is less generous. They have to work in order to support their living. But the second reason is non-pecuniary. There are those, many in Japan, who want to work in order to make life worth living and good for health and participate in society. In 2011, JILPT, or the Japan Institute for Labor Policy and Training, conducted a survey, and they asked why they are continuing to work for those who are between 65 and 69. More than half of the respondents answered that they are working to make life worth living. They think the working is good for health, and they want to participate in society. So those are non-pecuniary reasons for Japanese people to work. So those were the recap of the statistical data that are available. So let me turn to major legislative reforms during the 2000s. There were two major changes. The first is the pension reform. To be more specific, pensionable age for employee pension was raised in 2001. Second, revision of Early Employment Stabilization Law, or EESL. Both of these reforms had an effect on those males that are in the first half of their 60s. First, employee pension system reform. Correction. Both in the case of pension reform, employee pension reform and ESL, both employee pension and ESL are for those who had been in regular employment until age 60. Pension reforms preceded a revision of Early Employment Stabilization Law, and both of these changes had a particular impact on men in their first half of the 60s. Both employee pension and ESL are for those who had been in regular employment until the age of 60. The law itself is applicable to both men and women equally, but the most relevant is those who have always been in regular employment since fresh out of school to statutory retirement. ESL does not explicitly exclude non-regular employees, but the law has only been applied to regular employees in practice. Women in this generation are mostly non-regular if they work at all, so they've not they are not that affected. Of course, some women who are in regular employment could also be impacted, but in terms of absolute number, those women who are affected is rather limited. For those 65 and over, there was no major change except for minor change in pension system. Therefore, this policy change has had no direct impact on those 65 and over. Before I talk about the change to the Japanese pension system, let me give you an overview of the Japanese pension system. As many of you who live in Japan are aware, the Japanese public pension can be divided into national pension, employees' pension, and mutual aid pension. Now, let me start with national pension. National pension is for everyone. It is a basic pension, and this is members are mostly self-employed and those not employed. The pensionable age is 65, and approximately speaking, it is the basic pay is benefit is 60,000 yen or so. And the contribution and the benefit do not necessarily link to the past income. And the national pension has not gone through major changes, overhaul in the recent years, except for minor changes to contributions and benefits. Employees' pension are for those for working for private sector companies, and mutual aid pension is for public servants. And these are the two pension systems which have gone through major overhauls, different from national pension. Both employee pension and mutual aid pension have basic part, and proportion part. And the basic part, as is the case with national pension, it is roughly 60,000 yen, which is not linked to the past income. But the pensionable age is different from national pension. Up until 2000, the pensionable age was 6 years old. However, since 2001, the pensionable age has been raised by 1 year gradually, and for those born in after April 1941, the eligibility age was raised to 61 for the basic part. Thereafter, eligibility age was raised by 1 year every 2 years until it reached 65, and it is currently suspended at the level of 65 years of age. For a proportional part, the pensionable age was 60 years old until 2013, and the amount is based on the cumulative contributions paid or past income. Therefore, some people get a lot of significant amount of benefit, but there is a major difference between individuals. Right now, we are in the process of gradually raising eligibility age for the proportional part. But we are still in the process, so we don't have enough data. So today, I would like to limit myself to looking at the effect on basic, the effect of raising the eligibility age for the basic part. Another piece of reform was the reform in the earnings text of employees' pension or old age pension for those still working. The old age pension for those still working is, and under the system, pension benefit gets cut in accordance with income. The more you work, the more income you earn, the pension benefit could be reduced. Therefore, this may have an impact of discouraging labor supply of those who are pensionable. Up until April 2005, all recipients with positive earnings suffered a 20% reduction in their pension benefits regardless of their earnings. In addition, if pension benefit plus earnings exceeded 280,000 yen per month, pension benefit plus earnings by 280,000 divided by 2 is subtracted from the pension benefit, which is equivalent to 50% tax on extra earnings. If pension benefit plus earnings is in excess of 460,000 yen, the pension benefit plus earnings minus 460,000 is subtracted from the pension benefit. So 460,000 is the maximum you could receive. And if your salary is 460,000 or more, there will be no pension. In April 2005, to weaken this discouragement effect, the 20% reduction of all with positive earnings was abolished. This is not like raising applicable eligible age. This change was applied not cohort by cohort, but everyone above 60 since April 2005. So this must have had positive impact on elderly employment. So let me talk about EESL division. EESL Early Employment Stabilization Law has been in existence since 1970s to protect employment of older workers. Prior to the 2006 revision, under the EESL was prohibited to set mandatory retirement age younger than 60. Therefore, most of the companies set mandatory retirement age at 60. Until 2001, eligibility age for full pension benefit was also 60, which means most people can work until they can start to receive full pension benefit. So they were immediately, the pension benefit was immediately accessible upon retirement, but since 2001, people can no longer receive full pension benefit right after mandatory retirement. The proportional part was available at the age of 60. However, 60,000 yen per month income reduction, this would mean, therefore, there was an increasing demand for securing employment opportunities after mandatory retirement at the age of 60. To institute a system to continue employment up to the pension eligibility age, the revised EESL mandated employers to institute a system to continue employment up to the pension eligible age, because the revision in 2006 intended to fill this gap between mandatory retirement and pension eligibility age. What does it mean, institute a system to continue employment up to the pension eligibility age? Please turn to the next page. Simply put, the employee have to offer job opportunities for continued employment until the age specified by the law. To be precise, up until March 2013, employees were allowed to pick those who were eligible based on a criteria until March 2013. But now, the employers have to offer employment opportunities to all those who want employment opportunities. This is not equal to raising the mandatory retirement age. Raising the mandatory retirement age means that the employer continues to hire the worker on the same contract. Continued employment is not necessarily based on the same contract. Under the current EESL, re-employment at a much lower wage level can be done, and voluntary retirement could be encouraged. That is not illegal by raising retirement lump sum, offering financial incentive. This kind of continued employment after the mandatory retirement was quite common even before the EESL revision. Mandatory retirement may have a slightly different meaning in English, but what we mean by mandatory retirement in the Japanese context is to retire from full-time regular employment. Does not necessarily mean exit from the labor market at large. It does not necessarily mean leaving an employer. The revision in 2006 made the continued employment system mandatory. Now let me turn to talk about the eligibility change.
In 2006, ESL was enforced, so those who became 60 before that, there was the rule that meant the retirement before that age was prohibited. And so those cohorts were given this opportunity. In those who were born in 1947 or 46, 63, 64, and 65 was the new age that was set. Now, with regard to the pensionable age, it was started in 2001. So for those who were born in 1941, 61 was the given age, and 62 and 63 for 1944 and 1945 each. So 1 year difference by the difference of birth. And then there's going to be other portions and to be followed. Next, who are the people who were most affected by the reforms? First, the employees, those salaried workers, are the ones that were targeted under these reforms. And this is one thing I have to mention here. As has been mentioned, when it comes to national pension age, the pensionable age was originally set at 65, so it is not affected. And as for the ESL, it is also irrelevant to the self-employed people. Now, so these programs or changes had nothing to do with the self-employed. Those salaried workers, what would be the size of the population? 75% of men aged 59 were salaried workers, and remaining 15% were self-employed, and 10% were not in workforce. Compared to men, women were less likely to be affected. That is because those who belong to this age cohort and those who were employed were mostly non-regular workers, so they were not targeted under this scheme. And the pensionable age increase or postponing, there was a difference between men and women. Now, as for the mutual aid scheme, the postponing took place for both the men and female, but for the employees and pension scheme, there was a 5 years difference. And so the men population were more affected, and I would like to use the next slide to give you more explanation about the employees of large-size companies. How come there was more impact on those employees of large-size companies? Now, when it comes to the retirement, there was a strict mandatory retirement rule that was in place. More specifically, every year, dozens of hundreds of people retire every year. Therefore, there should be the explicit rule that was in place in order to take care of those retirees. But there are those smaller companies that would only have one or two retirees every several years. And in the case of smaller size companies, even before the amendment to ESL, there were a large number of people or workers above age 60. So there was no immediate impact. And I would like to share this slide in order to corroborate my argument. You can see this and shows, well, the y-axis is number of employees different and sizes against the population, and x-axis is age, and you can see how many people are captured in each category of the companies. And dotted line represents age 60. A red dot or line represents the cohort that are not covered by the ESL. The blue line represents those who are impacted by the ESL. Now, as for smaller firms, you can see there is no major difference between the two cohorts. There is no major gap or difference around age 60. There are no major withdrawal from the workforce after this age. Now you can see a big gap in the case of large firms. So those are the ones that have retired at the age of 60. Now at this dotted line, if you take a difference between the two lines after the amendment to EESL, the number of those who decided to stay were less, but still there are some numbers of people who decided to retire from the work. Now another data. This is the survey on employment conditions of all the pensions conducted by the Ministry of Health, and this shows what was the impact of the ESL on big companies and the smaller firms, and how was the system before the revision 2004 and 2008. And smaller firms with the employees of 5 and to 29, and the bigger large establishments with the 100 employees and over. As 2004, 38.2% of smaller firms have the mandatory retirement age at 65. Now, in 2008, the ratio does not change and to a great extent. And so 40% didn't have the mandatory retirement age, but the mandatory retirement age was set at under 65 in the case of larger firms. Now, the number for workers who continue to work after 60, if you take a look at the lower bottom, almost 80% of small firms have the continued employment, and after the revision, over 80%. But you can see a jump or increase in the case before the revision. In the case of larger firms, less than 30%, but it jumped to over 50%. So you can see there's a major difference. Now, I would like to share with you some of the facts related to the existing research. If I expand all the research results on a global scale, there are so many, but I will focus on what has been found in the case of Japan. And first, what kind of impact of the supply of the elderly labor by changes to the pension plan? And first, I would like to briefly talk about the earnings test of the employees and pension. There are those who have the income earners near the threshold, and they were impacted to a great extent. But this was not about the changes that were made in 2005, but the existing research focused on changes before that. But the most likely 2008 amendment also had impact. So when it comes to earnings test of the employees and pension, there were several changes, and so we have existing research. But as for the pension age postponement, we do not have any clear research results. That said, I would like to touch upon my own research, and Kurosawa-san and Ishii-san, according to their research results, there was some impact to a certain extent, but there is no robust result that is evident. The amendment of ESL and combined together with this amendment, the pensionable age postponement would have a more likely possibility, the impact on the supply of the elderly labor, which corroborates with the evidence that was captured by Professor Newmark. Next, ESL's impact on the employees of people in their 60s. As I mentioned briefly, Simon Fraser University in Canada there is a researcher named Shizuoka. Together with him, I found the following result. Now, first, the ESL amendment in 2006 had positive impact on improving the employment rate for men in the early 60s. I mentioned that such changes would have a larger impact on large-sized companies' employees, and the fact corroborated this prediction. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a complementarity between postponing and pensionable age and ESL. And so, ESL, after the ESL, that the pensionable age postponing had a positive impact on the labor supply. And it is taken for granted because of the continued employment system in place that the pensionable age postponement had resulted in having larger impact. But what we can capture from these research results suggest that ESL definitely had a good impact, but this fact alone would not be able to fully explain the reason behind the employment increase for male in the early 60s. This is an extracted estimation from our dissertations and articles. The 1946 cohort is covered by ESL. And in the previous year, the 1945 cohort is not covered. So if you make a comparison between two cohorts, you will be able to predict the impact made by ESL. In the first line, you can see the number 0.024. What does this mean? The percentage of employees in the population of the male aged 60, and what would be the level of employment compared to other age cohorts, 1946 and others. And first, the overall increase, and this number 0.24 means 2.4% increased. And then 3.2% here. ESL is going to take care of those 1946, 1947 cohorts, and you can the significant difference cannot be visible, but 2 or 3% would be the level of employment increase. And there will be no impact on 63 and 64 dummy. But 2006 and around this year, there was a jump in terms of the number of employments. The percentage was 7% or 8%. So 2 or 3% that is estimated here compared to that level, overall increase is much larger. Therefore, this ESL cannot explain fully the reason behind it. And those columns represent what would be the level of impact by the size of the company. You can see star signs, and the star signs represent statistically significant. So you can see the 2% would be the level for larger companies, but not statistically significant for mid-size and small-size companies. And you can also tell from this table that the impact itself is larger when it comes to large-size companies. So, with regard to existing research results, the last point I would like to share with you is an important policy agenda. However, it is not well known yet. The substitution effect for younger workers. And these are the empirical research results. As I have mentioned, existing research results do exist in other countries, but when it comes to Japan, unfortunately, there is no direct evidence or visible evidence. I should admit that fact. The reason is there is not sufficient panel data of firms and establishments, so it is difficult to give accurate verification. There is no decisive evidence we have not obtained yet. But there are some existing research results making use of limited data. According to such results, by protecting the elderly employment, that does not automatically disfavor the new graduates workers in the market. There is a story that promoting the elderly employment will disfavor the employment of the young people. But so far as the limited data and research suggest, we can produce the panel data, and there were those companies that had a large number of people in the late 60s and 50s. So those companies would have been impacted to a large extent after the amendment of the law. And so we will be. So I did research to find out if a younger generation of workers were affected. But the fact is that when there's a large number of people who reach the retirement age, there will be more opportunity for firms and to hire younger generation at the same time. The intuition suggests that would be the case. And the ESL obligates firms and to re-employ those retirees. So, but if you take a look at those numbers, there was no negative impact on the hiring of younger people. And so, estimating from these facts, I should say that ESL does not disfavor the employment opportunities of younger people. In addition to them, the cross-section data at the firm level was used by some research, and the prefecture-based data were also used in other research results, looking at the correlation of the data. That means if there is a negative correlation between the young people employment and the elderly employment, there will be no negative impact on new recruits. But as for middle-aged female workers, there may be a certain negative impact. In particular, in my own study, what was suggested was that there should have been some kind of substitution impact or effect on female part-timers in their middle age. Those people have been there. There is such possibility that these people are replaced by the retirees, male retirees, in the continued employment. Lastly, what would be effective policies based on these results? This has not been clarified yet, but we need to clarify them. First, impact on the female labor supply. We have to study that. Promoting elderly man employment. In the past, promoting the elderly employment, the past policies are focused on elderly men, but it may have impact on the spousal employment opportunities. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, if there are going to be rehired men and the middle-aged female workers, if there is any substitution effect, in particular, this is going to have a big impact on those married female workers in their 30s and 50s. The population is going to decline and the workforce needs to be secured. It is extremely important for married women, the middle-aged female workers to be given employment opportunities. So going forward, this aspect is needs to be highlighted. And impact on the productivity of corporation is also important. Empirical research accumulation is not yet in place, but it is extremely important from the policy viewpoint. Now, if the law obligates firms with regard to re-employment and continued employment, it may have the likelihood of lowering the corporate productivity because of securing excess or unnecessary workforce. If the wage is not going to be adjusted accordingly, then definitely that would have negative impact on the corporate profitability. There is such likelihood. But if the elderly workers' wage is to be effectively adjusted in accordance with the productivity, we would not be able to have this kind of a thing from happening. We don't know if the wage has come down sufficiently, but we have the evidence that testify that the elderly workers' salary or wage has come down. We need to further study that area. Thank you very much.